All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are taking a deep dive into
Ooh.
into the world of philosophy of education.
Ooh, exciting.
We're going to break down a really cool YouTube video I found from Philo Notes
Okay.
that asks, like, the most basic question, right?
Hmm.
What is this thing called philosophy of education?
Yeah, like what even is that?
And here's the thing. The answer is,
Huh?
like, way more interesting.
I think a lot of times.
We just kind of like send our kids off to school, or we
Yeah.
sign up for that online course, right?
Yes.
And we don't really examine
Yeah.
what education even is.
Yeah, it's like we're all just like using the system, right?
Yeah.
But we don't even know like what the blueprint is.
Totally.
And so what I thought was so interesting
Yeah.
in this video is that philosophy of education can actually like take on two different forms.
Interesting.
So it can be about the actual process of educating, right? Like, you know, the hands-on stuff in the classroom.
But it can also like zoom out
Okay.
and be about studying the entire field of education itself.
That's kind of like being a chef in a really busy kitchen
Okay.
versus being a food historian who is like researching how cuisine
I love that.
has evolved
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy.
over time.
Yeah, because you're right. They're both dealing with food,
Mm-hmm.
but from very different perspectives.
Totally.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So the video highlights that there are all of these different approaches within philosophy of education,
Okay.
right? Just like there are a lot of different ways
Right.
to run a school or even teach a single lesson.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking like analytical, normative, societal influences.
So it's not like
a whole buffet of
a
thought.
tight one-size-fits-all
Right.
field. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So to like really get a grasp of all this,
Okay.
we need to break down
Yeah.
some of these different approaches.
Let's do it.
So let's start with, okay, analytical philosophy of education.
All right, so think of it this way.
Right.
You're like an educational detective,
Yeah.
and you're trying to solve this like big mystery of what learning even means. And that's what analytical philosophers do, right?
Wow.
They take these big, really complicated ideas, break them down into smaller pieces,
Okay.
and they try to get to that like core meaning.
So it's like we're dissecting a frog
Exactly.
in biology class.
But instead of a
But instead of a frog,
it's like the concept of teaching
right, or ability,
or ability.
but getting under the hood
Totally.
to see what makes it tick.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay.
Good.
So then you have
Yeah.
normative philosophy of education.
So this one shifts the focus, right?
Okay.
We go from what is to what should be.
Oh, interesting.
So now we're grappling with questions like,
Okay.
what are the goals of education?
Mm-hmm.
What are the values or like dispositions it should prioritize?
I love that. Okay.
So imagine you are building your dream school,
Okay.
like from scratch. You're designing it.
Yeah.
What kind of graduates
Yeah.
do you want to see walking out of those doors?
Wow.
That is where normative philosophy comes in.
Okay, so let me just like make sure I'm getting.
Yeah.
So analytical is about kind of like dissecting these concepts that we use in education.
Mm-hmm.
And then normative is about
Warrant.
using philosophy
How do we want
to create the education we want to see.
like shape? Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay, I'm with you.
Okay.
Now, the video also makes this point that like
Mm-hmm.
philosophy of education doesn't exist in a vacuum, right?
It does not.
It's very much like intertwined with the
Yeah.
societies in which it operates.
Yeah, philosophers can almost act as like consultants, right? For education systems.
Yeah.
Analyzing how they work, supporting goals, like pointing out potential problems,
Ooh.
or even coming up with radical new approaches.
Right.
And especially in like pluralistic societies where you have a ton of different viewpoints on education,
Yeah.
philosophers can be really helpful in navigating
Okay.
those complexities.
So they're almost like the mediators,
Yeah.
helping everybody understand each other
Totally.
and maybe even come to some kind of compromise.
Exactly. Yeah. And so this brings us to like a really crucial point, which is
What?
why does philosophy of education even matter?
Right. Like,
Is this just a bunch of academics debating in their ivory tower?
right.
Or does this actually have like real world value?
I love it. Well, the video talks about John Dewey,
Big
who
name.
we've mentioned before.
Yeah.
And he had this idea that philosophy might be the most general theory of education. And I'll admit, when I first heard that, I was like,
Yeah.
what does that even mean?
It sounds intimidating.
It does sound a bit intimidating.
Right.
But I think it clicked for me when I was like thinking about Dewey's whole approach, right?
Yeah.
He was a pragmatist.
Right.
So he believed that philosophy should be about solving real-world problems,
Practical.
not just like
Yeah.
abstract theories.
Yeah, exactly.
And for him, education was the key tool for like social progress
Totally.
and personal growth.
Yeah.
So it's not just about hitting your head with facts.
Not at all. Dewey actually believed
Okay.
that education should prepare students to be active,
Okay.
engaged citizens who could contribute to making the world a better place.
I love that.
He envisioned schools almost as like laboratories
Oh,
for democracy,
okay.
where students learn to think for themselves,
Yeah.
work together,
Uh-huh.
and come up with solutions to real-world problems.
It's like education
Yeah.
as a superpower
Totally.
for positive change.
Exactly.
All right, I'm with you.
Okay.
But how did his ideas
Yeah.
about philosophy fit into all of this?
Well, he saw philosophy as like the foundation for all of these educational choices, right?
Okay.
So he believed our philosophical beliefs about knowledge, about truth, about human nature, all of that
Yeah.
informs how we approach education.
Okay.
It's like the underlying code
Interesting.
that shapes the program.
So even if we don't realize it, we're all kind of operating from some kind of philosophy of education.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, that's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, and by becoming more aware of those beliefs,
Right.
we can make more conscious and intentional choices
Yeah.
about how we educate ourselves and future generations.
I love it.
All right.
Okay. So far, so good. We've laid the groundwork here.
Yeah?
We've defined some key terms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we're starting to see why this whole philosophy of education thing might be
It's relevant.
relevant to everybody.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into the weeds here,
Okay.
let's take a step back
Right.
and see how some of these ideas like play out in practice.
I like it. To really grasp the impact of philosophy on education, right?
Yeah.
We got to explore those big thinkers,
Yeah.
the ones whose ideas really shaped how we think about
Okay.
learning and teaching even today.
Sounds good to me. Let's
Okay.
start with a name you might recognize from your high school history class.
Oh.
Aristotle.
Ooh, a classic. Okay, so we're going way back in time to ancient Greece to meet this guy named Aristotle.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you might remember him from your intro to philosophy class.
Right.
But what's really cool is how much his ideas actually influenced Western education,
Interesting.
even thousands of years later.
I mean, it's wild to think about how
Okay.
ideas from that long ago can still be so relevant.
Totally.
So the video talks about this concept of
Yeah.
excellent activity
Okay.
that Aristotle was really into.
Yeah, so it sounds kind of like a motivational poster or something, right?
It does. I was like, excellent activity. Like, okay, I get it.
But there's actually way more to it than that.
Okay, good.
For Aristotle, living a good life
Mm-hmm.
meant this constant striving for excellence,
Okay.
both in your intellectual pursuits and your moral actions.
So it wasn't just about being book
Excellent.
smart.
You had to be a good person, too.
Like a holistic
Exactly.
view of education
Yeah.
where your character
It
development
gets just as important.
is just as important as your academic achievements.
Exactly. And he believed that education played a huge role in shaping both of those.
That makes sense.
So by teaching young people the right knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and giving them opportunities to practice, virtuous behavior, we can help them become excellent in, all areas of life.
Okay, I'm following you.
Okay, good.
So how does this ancient Greek philosophy actually connect
Yeah, great question.
to education today?
So think about it, right?
Okay.
We still put so much emphasis on things like critical thinking, logical reasoning, ethical decision-making, all of that in our schools.
Yeah.
And those are all concepts that are rooted in Aristotle's philosophy.
So he was really laying the groundwork
He was.
for a lot of what we think is important today.
Totally.
Okay. It's really cool to see how all these ideas are connected.
Yeah.
All right. So the video also talks about John Dewey,
Okay.
who we've mentioned briefly before.
Yeah.
He had this idea that philosophy is like
Right.
the most general theory of education.
Okay.
Did you ever figure out what that means?
I think so. It kind of clicked for me when I was thinking about Dewey's whole approach to things.
Yeah.
He was a pragmatist,
Right.
which means he believed that philosophy should be about solving problems in the real world,
Yeah.
not just coming up with abstract theories.
So it should have practical application.
Exactly.
Right.
And for Dewey, education was that key tool for both social progress and personal growth.
So it's not just about, like I said before,
Yeah.
stuffing your head with facts.
It's not just about rote memorization.
Right.
Dewey thought that education should prepare students to be active,
Yeah.
engaged citizens who could, like, go out
Yeah.
and contribute to making the world a better place.
Right. So it has like this social impact.
Totally.
Yeah.
He almost thought of schools
Okay.
as these laboratories for democracy,
Interesting.
where students learn to think for themselves,
Mm-hmm.
work together, and come up with solutions to real-world problems.
It's so cool. It's like education as a superpower for change.
Exactly. And you know what? He also walked the walk.
Okay.
He was a big, big believer in learning by doing.
Okay. So that means,
So he thought that students learn best
yeah.
when they're, like, actively engaged, not
Mhm.
just passively, taking in information.
So that would be like
Just think like
hands-on projects,
hands-on projects, experiments,
experiments,
all that stuff.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
Okay, so, I mean, that really does
No.
resonate with a lot of modern education trends.
Totally.
But how did his ideas about philosophy
Yeah.
fit into all of this?
Well, Dewey saw philosophy as like the foundation
Okay.
for making all of these educational choices.
Right. Okay.
So
yeah.
our philosophical beliefs about knowledge,
Yeah.
truth, human nature,
Mm-hmm.
all of that informs
Okay.
how we approach education.
It's like the
I mean,
underlying
yeah.
programming.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it.
Cool.
Okay, so we've covered Aristotle,
All right.
ancient Greece, champion of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
We've covered John Dewey,
American pragmatist.
American pragmatist,
Yeah.
education as a force for social change.
Yes.
Are there any other big names?
There are tons.
Okay.
But I think one more that's definitely worth mentioning
Okay.
is Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Now, he's a little bit controversial,
Right.
but his ideas are really interesting.
Oh, lay it on me.
So Rousseau believed that children are actually born
Okay.
naturally good and curious,
Okay.
but it's society that kind of like
Oh, so he's like blaming
Yeah.
society for messing kids up.
that society messes them up with all of its rules and expectations.
So like he was an advocate for like
Yeah, totally.
free-range parenting?
In a way, yes.
It's interesting.
So he really advocated for an educational approach that
Uh-huh.
would nurture that like natural goodness in kids
Got-
and allow them to develop freely
Okay.
without all the constraints of traditional schooling.
I love that.
He famously said, let him run, let him jump, let him fall.
Hmm.
He wanted kids to learn through direct experience,
Yeah.
through exploration and play.
I mean, it sounds like unschooling.
It sounds a lot like unschooling.
Yeah, or nature-based learning.
Totally. Yeah.
Like a lot of these modern trends.
And while not everybody agrees with him,
Right.
I think Rousseau brought up some really important questions
Okay.
about the role of structure
Right.
and freedom in education.
It's all about finding that balance.
Finding that sweet spot, yeah.
Because too much structure,
Too much structure.
you might stifle creativity.
Stifle it, yeah.
Too much freedom.
Yeah,
Could be chaos.
exactly.
It's like each of these philosophers we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
is offering like a different
A different piece of the puzzle.
of the puzzle
Yeah.
to what makes a good educational experience.
And that's the beauty of this, right?
Okay.
It's not about finding the answer.
Mm-hmm.
It's about thinking about the different perspectives,
Yeah.
considering different possibilities,
Mm-hmm.
and then making, hopefully informed choices
Right.
about how we approach
Yeah.
learning and teaching.
It feels like we're starting to see
I don't think so.
the bigger picture here.
Sure.
One thing that keeps popping into my head, though,
Is we keep talking about these, like
Yeah.
famous philosophers.
the big names.
But what about the everyday experiences of teachers and students?
That's such a great point.
Yeah, like how do their
Yeah.
voices fit into all of this?
Because education isn't just about,
Right.
abstract theories. It's about real people
Yeah.
in real classrooms
Yeah.
grappling with real challenges
Mhm.
and celebrating real victories.
It's like we always talk about education as this
Yeah.
big system, right?
Yeah.
But
It's about the passion of that teacher
yeah.
who stays late grading papers because they truly believe in their students.
Yes.
Or like that aha moment
Yeah.
when a student finally grasps a concept they've been working on.
It's about those
Yeah.
human connections.
Those are the stories that bring it all to life.
Yeah, and I think those everyday experiences are really what remind us why we're even having this conversation in the first place.
So we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
Yeah, we have.
We talked about how philosophy can be used to analyze and shape education.
Yeah.
We met some of the big names, Aristotle, Dewey, Rousseau.
The all-stars.
Yeah. And I think we're starting to see how their ideas are still relevant.
Still relevant today.
Today, right.
Yeah.
But it feels like we've just been circling around this question of like...
Kind of, yeah. What's the value?
Like, why does any of this even matter?
Why should we care?
Yeah, it's not exactly like
Right.
cocktail party conversation.
Not really a party trick.
No.
No.
Okay, so like big picture.
Yeah.
What have we learned?
All right, so I think the big takeaway here is that philosophy of education, it can seem a little abstract, right?
A little heady.
Heady.
Okay.
But it really has this power to change the way we think about
Okay.
learning, teaching, the whole purpose of education itself.
It's like philosophy is holding up a mirror to our education system.
Yeah.
Forcing us to see what's working,
What's not.
what's not working,
Yeah.
and what we might want to change.
And I think it helps us ask those, like, really big, really important questions that we might otherwise just, like, avoid.
Okay.
Questions like, what kind of society do we want to create?
Oh, yeah.
What role should education play in that?
Yeah.
What does it mean to live a fulfilling life? How can education help us get there?
Those are some big questions.
They are big questions.
And I don't even know if there are, like...
And there might not be easy answers. Right?
Easy answers, but I think even just by, like...
Just by engaging with them.
Dipping our toes into philosophy of education, it helps us be more, like...
More thoughtful.
Thoughtful.
Or intentional.
Or intentional about our own learning journeys.
Absolutely.
About our kids' education and how we just, like...
How we see the world.
Engage with the world.
Yeah. So to all of our listeners out there,
Yes.
we encourage you, keep exploring these ideas.
Keep the conversation going.
Yeah, like dive into the work of the philosophers we talked about. Have these conversations with your friends, your families about education. And I think maybe the most important thing, just take some time to reflect on your own beliefs and values.
What do you believe in?
About learning and teaching. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Because remember, this isn't just for like academics. It's not just for policymakers.
It's for everybody.
It's for anyone who really cares about creating a better future through the power of education.
I love that. All right.
Okay, good.
So on that note, we are going to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, give me.
To ponder.
All right.
If you could design your dream educational system, what would it look like?
That's a good one.
What values would it prioritize? And what kind of learners would it produce?
Let those questions kind of percolate and see where they lead you.
I love it.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
All right. Until next time.
Yeah.
Keep those minds curious.
Keep them curious.
And those conversations flowing.
Keep talking.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. See